Texas church shooting.
So much hurt for a small town, for a small community.
Authorities learn more about the man suspected of killing 26 people at a house of worship. We'll have the latest in the investigation. President Trump in Japan. He meets with America's closest ally in the region and has strong words for North Korea. We'll have a report from the White House. Human trafficking. As the Vatican hosts meetings on the modern form of slavery, we speak to a victim working to stop this tragic problem. And pro-life and proud. An exclusive interview with an Irish college student who says she was removed from student government because of her pro-life views. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, November 6th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Federal and state authorities in Texas are learning more tonight about the man who opened fire on a small Baptist church near San Antonio, killing 26 people, injuring more than a dozen others. The worst mass shooting in the history of the Lone Star State has shocked the community and the entire nation. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from outside the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. That's the agency helping in the investigation. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Authorities with the ATF, as they are known, say they've recovered not one, but 3 guns connected to the suspect in the mass shooting. One was found in the church after the shooting itself, and 2 others were found in his car. More disturbing news for the small South Texas town still reeling after the attack.
A Sunday service turns into a massacre after a gunman opens fire on First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas.
You think you're safe in the house of the Lord, but the devil never rests.
Investigators say the suspect, 26-year-old Devin Patrick Kelly, once served in the U.S. Air Force, but was discharged for bad conduct. In 2012, he was court-martialed for assaulting his wife and child. Police say just after 11 a.m., Kelly, dressed in black tactical-style gear, went into the church and opened fire. The victims range in age from 18 months to 77 years old. The church's pastor lost his 14-year-old daughter.
You know, you don't expect to walk into a church and see something like that, you know. And seeing the children, that's what hurts the most.
Sheriff Joe Tackett says after the shooting, Kelly jumped into his car and was pursued by 2 others before he crashed his vehicle. Authorities say Kelly died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Last night, the small community of about 400 came together to pray. Texas Governor Greg Abbott was also there.
The one thing that I took away from last night is this is a strong faith-based community, and they are relying upon their faith to strengthen them, and that strength remains very strong even today.
Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference, also offers his prayers, saying today in part, a culture of life cannot tolerate and must prevent senseless gun violence in all its forms.
Investigators say the mass shooting was not religiously motivated, and it's not linked to terrorism. They believe the shooting stemmed from a domestic situation. We've also learned tonight that Vice President Mike Pence and his wife Karen will travel to Sutherland Springs, Texas on Wednesday to meet with families of the victims. Lauren.
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting. Thank you, Wyatt. President Trump calls the shooting in Texas, quote, an act of evil that occurred as the victims and their families were in their place of sacred worship. The president adds on Twitter, quote, may God be with the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas. The FBI and law enforcement are on the scene. I am monitoring the situation from Japan. The president says he is not ruling out military action against North Korea. He made the remarks while visiting Japan, the first stop on his 12-day Asia trip. He met with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to discuss trade and North Korea. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump is suggesting one trade deal between the 2 allies would help deter North Korea. He says Japan will be able to shoot down Kim Jong-un's missiles if it purchases military equipment from the U.S. President Trump says America won't stand for the North Korean menace.
Some people said that my rhetoric is very strong, but look what's happened with very weak rhetoric over the last 25 years.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe agrees with President Trump, who says all options are on the table when dealing with North Korea. The president met people whose lives have been directly affected by the oppressive regime, the families of abducted Japanese citizens.
It's a very, very sad number of stories that we've heard, and they were abducted in all cases by North Korea. And we will work with Prime Minister Abe on trying to get them back to their loved ones.
North Korea's nuclear threats were a focus of President Trump's two-day stop in Japan, which included meetings, press conferences, and what Prime Minister Shinzo Abe calls golf diplomacy. The two leaders are self-proclaimed friends, but the topic of trade brings friction. The U.S. trade deficit with Japan totaled nearly $70 billion last year. Still, Trump expresses optimism going forward.
We want free and reciprocal trade, but right now our trade with Japan is not free and it's not reciprocal, and I know it will be.
And President Trump contends if Abe buys American, the Prime Minister can easily defend Japan against North Korean missiles.
He will shoot them out of the sky when he completes the purchase of lots of additional military equipment from the United States.
Next, the president visits South Korea. Expect its neighbor to the north to continue to be a focus on this Asia trip. The president will have lunch with U.S. troops in South Korea, and later this week, he expects to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Vietnam. He says he needs Putin's help on North Korea. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Students and teachers gather on Capitol Hill for Catholic Advocacy Day. Around 1,400 representatives from Catholic high schools and colleges rally for changes to immigration and criminal justice. They walk to Capitol Hill to talk with lawmakers. It's part of the Ignatian Solidarity Network's call to enact immigration reform grounded in Catholic social teaching. Adoption proponents worry about the new Republican tax plan. The bill would eliminate the tax credit, which helps families afford the high costs of adoption. They can range from $15,000 to $50,000. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us about people fighting to keep this credit. Good evening, Jason.
Lauren, Congress is hosting the first hearing to debate the GOP tax bill. Pro-life group Susan B. Anthony List says it's shocking to gut the adoption tax credit. They urge lawmakers to protect it. Tonight, I want to introduce you to one young Catholic family who's counting on that credit.
Mateo lived the first 18 months of his life inside a Chinese orphanage. But in March, through the power of adoption,
almost back to the house. Let's keep going.
Allison and Mike Contreras became Mateo's mom and dad.
He brings so much joy to our life, and then to see him play with his friends around the neighborhood and to know that he's bringing joy to other families and in our whole community. He's right here with his best friend who we just kicked in the face.
The Contreras family spent years and tens of thousands of dollars to bring their new son home.
Yeah.
And to help with those costs, they qualify for a roughly $13,000 adoption tax credit.
We have a lot of love in our family. We have more love to give to more children. And unfortunately, in adoption, love isn't the only resource you need. And so anything that the country can do to support families that have love to give to a child in need is really appreciative.
The IRS says 64,000 families in 2015 took the adoption tax credit, totaling about $251 million. But the current Republican tax plan cuts the credit.
That's a good high five. Are you lefty?
With or without the tax credit, Allison and Mike again plan to adopt another infusion of joy into the Contreras home.
We're just happy that we could provide a home and a place for him to thrive.
And several lawmakers, including Senators Ben Sasse and John Kennedy, say the adoption tax credit is pro-life. Representative Mark Walker says it needs to be included in the tax bill. And Lauren, appropriately enough for this debate, November is National Adoption Awareness Month.
That's right. I remember the President Trump announced that. So what is the rationale for cutting this adoption credit?
the chairman of the Tax Writing Committee, Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas. He himself adopted 2 children, but he points to the overall benefits to families, the lower overall tax rates for families, the higher standard deduction, and the larger child tax credit. Florida Republican Vern Buchanan tells all families who receive the adoption tax credit to be hopeful. Today is just the first step in this tax debate.
On Capitol Hill, correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is recovering after an attack at his home. The senator has 5 broken ribs and lung injuries after being assaulted by a neighbor. Paul told officers the suspect tackled him from behind, forcing him to the ground. It is not clear when Paul will return to work. The King of Saudi Arabia swears in 2 new officials as the country deals with a sweeping anti-corruption probe. King Salman, shown meeting with the outgoing Prime Minister of Lebanon, names a new National Guard chief and a new economy and planning minister. Saudi officials detained 11 princes and 38 others accused of corruption. Catholic bishops in the Philippines begin a 33-day campaign to pray for an end to drug war violence. Police have killed more than 3,000 drug suspects. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte responds, saying he wants, quote, a better rapport with church leaders. A woman sold into slavery as a child in India wants the world to know the global problem isn't going away.
I want people all around the world to be able to take action, concrete action, to make a difference in a child's life. So we know this issue, $150 billion industry, and we're talking about selling and buying people.
Rani Hong was kidnapped from her father, forced to work at age 7. She was adopted later by an American family and is now an activist for human trafficking victims. Rani joins us from Rome. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, tell us what happened to you.
Yes, I was living in southern part of India, and at the age of 7 is when my dad was not feeling too well, and a respected woman in the community came and told my mother and father, can I please help you give this child an education? I can, just come down the street with me to stay with her. And in that time period, I remember my mother came to visit me every day. But one day when she came to get me, I was gone. And so what happened is that this woman was actually recruiting children, looking for vulnerable situations in southern part of India, looking for children and families to exploit. And so what happened, once she got control of me, she then sold me across the state border. So I was sold into slavery at the age of 7, and my master, we might call him, as in the slavery, he was actually using children to, in the brick kiln. So he was using myself and some kids that I was with to work in the brick kilns. So that's kind of where the forced labor. He was in the He was in the manufacturing company. He was working there, and he was recruiting children to come into his area. You might say it's a factory, and using children to work against their will. Human trafficking is forcing children to work against their will, no pay. And what happened is lots of abuse.
And you were all alone. There was nothing for you there. Tell me how you got free, and now what you're doing, and why it's so important.
We can all do something to prevent human trafficking and then become a voice for children who are absolutely trapped in this industry. So I ask, it was my faith that absolutely helped me in the healing process. It took many years. But with the love and the care, that's all we're asking for as human beings. Love, care, and attention.
Rani Hong, human trafficking advocate. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren, and I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to share the message.
Coming up, the Vice President's former press secretary tells me what it's like to work in the White House. Plus, one step closer to sainthood. A nun killed for her faith is declared blessed by the Vatican. Callista Gingrich arrives in Rome. The United States Embassy to the Holy See tweeted this picture welcoming Gingrich, who becomes the 11th ambassador since relations were established in 1984. The Trump administration comes out swinging daily over the media's coverage. Many stories showing the administration in an unfavorable light are deemed fake news. Our next guest has been on the inside, working closely with the president and vice president. Here he is with Vice President Pence, who tweeted, quote, "Big thanks to @VP Press Sec for doing a great job for @POTUS and our team. He might be leaving the White House, but I know we'll see him all the time on TV." And he was right. Joining us now is Mark Lauder, former Special Assistant to the President, Press Secretary to the Vice President. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. You were on ABC This Week yesterday, and you said that Russia is not coming up in day-to-day operations
Correct.
At the White House. But there's a criminal investigation that indicted former campaign chairman and has forced numerous staffers, including the vice president, to hire lawyers. The president's tweeting about it. If this were happening in my office, I think people would be distracted. Isn't it a distraction?
Well, no, because what you have is, and Ari Fleischer said it, the former White House press secretary under President Bush said it so well, on any given day there are usually 13 or 14 different distractions going on at the White House. There's always major events, whether they're in the news today or tomorrow or next week, there's always something going on. And really this has been a very focusing thing, because the one thing that the
Russia
staff does, it focuses the staff. They are focusing on their jobs. They're focusing on the things that they can control. They're focusing on the things that they can do
because they
to
don't know
advance
what Mueller's going to do.
And they're focused entirely on advancing the president's agenda. So when I was there last week meeting with my former colleagues, and we were talking tax reform. We were talking the president's, at that point, upcoming trip to Asia, which he's now on right now. So really outside of that, those are the only things that the staff is focused on right now.
Let's switch to gun control. I am sure you watched the coverage yesterday of that just horrific shooting in Texas. We showed video of it a little bit earlier in the show. Your former boss is a devout Christian. This happened in a church. 26 people gunned down. Yet, no one is talking about guns. And the president today said this isn't a gun issue, this is a mental health issue. After Las Vegas, when 58 people were killed, and there was talk about banning those bump stocks. Even the NRA came out for that, and then they sort of reversed on that. We're not seeing movement on gun control. Why is that? Why isn't the White House behind regulations?
Well, first off, obviously, I want to express my condolences and my thoughts and prayers to everyone that were affected by this tragedy in Texas. And the vice president is actually going to Texas. It was just announced a few minutes ago on Wednesday to meet with the victims, families, and survivors, and those in the community to thank the first responders. But what you're seeing right now is we've got to get more information on these kinds of things. Whether it's Las Vegas, we still are trying to figure out what exactly happened in Las Vegas. Here with this was a domestic issue, but from everything that we know, there were multiple reasons why this individual should not have been able to obtain guns under current federal law. So what we need to do is take a look at and make sure that investigators have the freedom to get all of the information and then make an informed decision, especially when it comes to an issue like gun control, people's Second Amendment rights. It was guaranteed to us in the Constitution. So when we're making those decisions, we need to make sure that we're doing it from a basis of fact, but also looking to see, was there a problem in the existing system that allowed someone who, under possibly multiple reasons, should not have been able to buy weapons, that he did in fact buy these weapons. So there's a lot of things we need to know right now. And so right now we need to focus on the investigation, providing our support to the families, and that when there's an appropriate time to have that discussion, we can move forward from it with an area of fact.
Before we go, we want to talk about Christian persecution in the Middle East. This is an issue that we cover, and I've been to Iraq and been to the towns where Christians have fled. They have no electricity, they have no water. Vice President Pence promised that money would get to persecuted Christians. A new program was unveiled, and he said that it's now going to run through USAID. UN had been building schools, but things weren't happening. Money wasn't getting to Christians under the UN. And now we have this 8-page sort of RFP, request for proposal from USAID for building in the Nineveh Plains. This came out right after Vice President Pence made this announcement. But it's going to take months. for anything like this to get through the bureaucracy and the system. So what can be done in the short term to help these persecuted Christians?
Well, right now, so what you saw, the Vice President announced in a major speech a couple of weeks ago, very moving personal speech for him. It's something he's been focused on since his time as a congressman. He spoke during that speech about going to Iraq himself shortly after the hostilities stopped in the Iraq War and seeing it for himself. The president is committed to protecting all people of faith. He's taken many executive actions. He's appointed judges who support the rights of people of faith. But what he also realized was that more than $1 billion had been spent under the previous administration through various UN programs, and we'd had very little to show for it in terms of protecting people of faith and persecuted Christians. So by moving this, but obviously there is a government, there is a process that we have to do in place.
But these people, I saw them firsthand. You know, they're building schools, but they don't have heat and electricity at home. So what do you do?
Right now, what we need to do is make sure that the assets that we have, the money that we are redirecting away from the United Nations to faith-based organizations, private organizations, can actually get there as quickly as possible. Sometimes it does take a little bit of time to go through that government bureaucracy, but we're also working with groups that are already on the ground, seeing what we can do to help stem the tide.
Knights of Columbus, maybe?
There are a number of groups that have been talked to. I think the Vice President actually spoke about the Knights of Columbus during his speech 2 weeks ago. So there are things that we can do in the short term, but the focus is long term, is getting the actual faith-based organizations and private organizations the funding so they can do the work that they already want to do and stop going through a UN bureaucracy that has priorities that are not the same as ours. Okay. And it's much of an America First policy, just like the president has always promised. We're going to use our dollars with American non-for-profits for faith-based groups and have them do the great works that they already are eager to do, fund them to go do that around the world.
Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Mark Lauder, former special assistant to the president, press secretary to the vice president.
Thank you
so much. Pope Francis honors an Indian nun who was beatified over the weekend.
Ha dato testimonianza a Cristo nell'amore e nella mitezza.
The Pope praying yesterday that Blessed Rani Maria be a seed of faith and peace, particularly in India. Sister Rani was killed in 1995 after an assassin stabbed her 54 times. Her beatification took place Saturday in India. Beatification is the last step before sainthood. Up next, pro-life student ousted. We'll hear from the Irish woman recently removed as student body president. And animals on the stage, and a blessing from a cardinal. We remembered Saint Leonard today on his feast day. He was a French nobleman who died in the 6th century and is the patron saint of prisoners. We have told you about Katie ASCO. She's a student at the University College in Dublin, recently ousted as student president for her pro-life views. EWTN contributor Colm Flynn sat down with her and has more in an exclusive interview from Dublin.
Here in Dublin, at Ireland's largest university, UCD, the president of the Students' Union, Katie ASCO, was recently impeached after removing abortion information from the college magazine. When she originally ran for president earlier in the year, she had been upfront about her pro-life views.
I knew my faith and my personal beliefs weren't exactly the norm in UCD. I got asked over and over again my views on abortion and how I was going to deal with that. And I answered everything very upfront, very honest. I said I was going to respect the pro-choice mandate of the union. I was going to delegate on issues like marching at pro-choice rallies.
ASCO claims to have made the decision on the back of legal advice from the student union's independent lawyer, who stated that the publication of such material would almost undoubtedly constitute a breach of Irish law.
Once I had that advice, it was quite clear what I needed to do. I was not comfortable with risking a personal criminal record for the rest of my life and for anybody else involved with the books. I promised to respect a pro-choice mandate of the union, and I did, but I never promised to break the law or to risk a criminal record for the rest of my life.
Katie made the decision to reprint all the magazines, despite the fact that every other member of the Students' Union board disagreed with her decision.
It was met with some backlash by some students, and they started a petition for my impeachment over this issue, saying that their president had censored abortion information. It was not a personal moral issue, it was a legal issue.
Amy Crean is a student at UCD and led the campaign to have Katie removed.
Throughout her election campaign, Ms. ASCO had said that she wouldn't work on issues relating to abortion because of those views, and we have a mandate to work on being pro-choice. And so if you're going for a political position, which this is, student unions are political bodies, then you sign up to do that job and you leave your views at the door if there is conflict.
Students took to social media, some to express their support for Katie at making what they saw as a good editorial and legal decision, while others expressed their anger, claiming that she let her pro-life views interfere with the running of the Students' Union. Were you surprised at the reaction?
It did kind of feel like some people were waiting for that from the get-go, and that there was a target on my back.
69% of students voted to impeach her as president, and in a speech following that announcement, Katie stated it was a sad day for freedom of speech in UCD.
I would hope that the light this has shown on some people's intolerance will encourage more people and show people the need really to stand up and have your voice heard, because if some people don't want your voice to be heard, I almost think that can be more of an incentive to get your voice out there. It will take courage, it will take a bit of bravery, but I think it really is just so necessary. I feel like I fought the good fight. I did what I felt was right, what I felt I needed to do, and I don't see how much else could have been different.
And UCD will elect a new president in the near future. In Dublin, Colm Flynn for EWTN News Nightly.
You can watch Colm Flynn's exclusive extended interview with Katie ASCO on our EWTN News Nightly Facebook page. Finally tonight, New York's Cardinal Timothy Dolan had a busy morning hanging out with camels, sheep, donkeys, and the Rockettes.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Dolan was on hand today to bless the animals taking part in the Living Nativity scene for the 2017 production of the Rockettes' Christmas Spectacular. The show takes place at Radio City Music Hall and is a New York tradition. This year's show opens Friday, believe it or not, and runs until January 1st. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.